All right. Hey, Tim.
Hey,
Thanks for joining me.
absolutely.
How are things going?
We're functioning. That's where life is right now. But it's a good. It's a
Three
good
small
function.
kids,
Yeah,
new job.
throwing a dog into it too is always a fun time. So yeah,
Always seems like a better idea than it really is,
it
right?
really. Yeah, I was a cat person growing up. So
Yeah.
his wife, happy life. So
Oh,
it was Kristen's.
Kristen wanted
Yeah, but we're good.
wanted the dog.
We love her. Leia is wonderful.
Yeah, you don't want Leia to see this. And
No.
feel like Leia would be very upset about
She'd
that.
be very sad. Very sad.
I'm part of the family, Daddy.
Yeah, she is. She really is.
But I'm really thankful that you're willing to come on, because what we're going to talk about is something a lot of people experience in some kind of way, unfortunately, very unfortunately, but are often too embarrassed or ashamed to talk about. And understandably, but at the same time, that leaves others who might see this and kind of they're in that boat, and by seeing you talk about it, the hope for me is that they'll say, I can talk about this, I can get help, I'm not, like, it's not my fault, and get help. So without keeping it a mystery, is why don't you take us back to what happened, when it happened, and just kind of in your own words tell us your story, and I'll interrupt where I think it necessary.
Yeah. It was back 2001, freshman year of high school. I remember I was in my French class at that point, and in the high school, it was kind of this 2-floor situation, and kind of an L, F, whatever. There's a couple wings off of it.
Yeah.
But during this class, I just remember having an upset stomach, so I went to the only bathroom I knew, even though there were multiple bathrooms around the school. I ended up going down to the first floor bathroom in the middle of the school, and did what you do in the bathroom at that point, and went back to class, and then probably about 15 minutes later had to excuse myself again, went back down, and as I'm in the stall, I hear a voice from up above me asking for some toilet paper because they were out, which wasn't weird, but I was just like, okay, this is awkward, but okay, I appeased him in that situation.
Yeah.
And
Did you recognize who it was?
didn't know who it was, just a random, and it's kind of weird. It was an older school, so the lighting was bad in there anyhow, and they had these probably 8-9 foot high cement walls on either side. I think my grandmother went to the school too, so nothing was.
I'm like picturing a scene from like Stranger Things.
It was definitely a stranger
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And next thing I know, another, hey, do you have more toilet paper? I could, so handed some toilet paper
Again?
and then about maybe 2 minutes later, I see this guy kind of walk by the stall. I hear the door open next to me, and then ended up in the top corner. There was kind of like a space between the door and the cement wall, and I see these eyes kind of peer in, and next thing you know, this guy barges into the bathroom stall.
Did you know who it was?
No clue. Not a teacher or another. Definitely an older guy. Well, at the time, probably 30. How
Your
old?
age.
My
To you
age
felt
now.
old, yeah.
Ancient.
He was an
guy.
adult.
He was.
Yeah.
But didn't recognize him as a staff or even one of the substitute teachers. Just a random guy. And at that point, someone came into the bathroom, and so he kind of got closer to me and kind of put his hand over my mouth and told me to be quiet and shush me. And after that person left, he ended up going back out checking the other stalls, I guess, just to make sure no one else was in there, and then came back in and began to touch me, and while he was touching himself. And
Did you say you were a freshman?
I was freshman, so 13, 14,
Yeah.
that range. And then he ended up relieving himself is the best way to put it, and then ended up leaving the bathroom. And at that point, I went back up to my class and finished out the rest of the day. I think there was maybe a period and a half left from that time frame. Rode the bus home, and then as soon as my dad came home, just broke down and told him what happened. And we ended up going back to the school, talking with the principal, who was actually in the process of walking out and to go home at that point.
Yeah.
And then he asked me to leave the office and actually basically asked my dad, "Is this something that your son would make up?" And basically told him no. So we ended up going to the police station, and so for the rest of the night and the next day, going through all that process of drawing sketches and kind of.
So the principal didn't seem to have any idea who.
No. He remembers as the composite pictures came up between what I put together and what he put together. They were very similar. So it was the same. Like he had seen a guy in the hallway, and he kind of based his off of that. And so to have that kind of similarity, there are certain things that kind of did match up. So, but yeah, so that was kind of what happened, and so.
When you were in the stall and he's shushing you, like what's going through your mind? Do you remember?
It's just fear. There's a lot of fear. And
Did he threaten you at all, or was it just implied?
He said basically just you need to stay quiet. There was never like, besides putting his hand on my mouth, like there was no like threat of I'm gonna hurt you if you say anything, but you need to be quiet. And so, but yeah, besides that, it was more shock of like you'd never expect, especially in your school, like you would never expect something like that to happen. Maybe out in public somewhere, or in like a random porta potty or something. But it was just that yeah, it was more of the shock and just not like.
School's supposed to be a place that you're safe.
Right.
It's like maybe home's first, and school should be like number 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the whole time, and then what about as you're being abused, were you just continually in shock, or just like, I just get this over with?
Yeah, just kind of like an outer body experience is the best way to put it. Is I was there, I was experiencing it, but it was almost felt like I was watching it from the outside, like and just hoping someone would come in, like just hoping someone would come into the bathroom at that point. And
because you also don't know, what if this might not just be what he's doing? He could hurt me. He could kill me. I mean, he must have been thinking all of those things.
Yeah, like
to some degree.
I haven't always been the jacked individual that I am.
Yeah. Now you're fearsome.
No, but like it wasn't until that summer where I kind of hit my growth spurt. But I was always just a tiny, like a smaller kid, and so there was always
helpless.
helpless. Yeah. So.
Did he say anything to you when he left, or just
don't say anything? And he walked out.
So you had a little bit of time the rest of the day at your school. Not a lot. Was it towards the end of the day already?
Yes, yeah. So it was post lunch, so probably why I was in the bathroom for cafeteria food and stuff.
Seriously, you had the pizza or something, and man.
Yeah, it was. If I remember correctly, it was either like the last period or there's one more period after that, but it was just a shorter in comparison to the rest of the day.
And were you just like, I just need to get home, I need to get home?
Yeah, it's like there was a part of me wanting to just walk out of the school and just walk home. We were not super close, but at the same time, walking distance.
Yeah.
But this idea of like, I need to get out of here. I need to be gone. So.
And so, when your dad came home and you were sobbing, what were some of the things you remember saying to him?
Trying to tell him. I honestly don't remember what came out of my mouth. It was, I guess, call it verbal diarrhea at that point, where it was just.
And he's trying to figure out
all the feelings.
As a parent, you send your kid to school.
Yeah. But it was trying to find where I was planning on not saying anything because of not knowing how to say it, but at the same time, just still in shock of what took place.
So your original plan is, I'm not going to tell anyone this
I'm
happened.
just going to move on. Like, what am I going to do? What can we do? Like, I don't know this guy. There weren't cameras at the school at this time.
So what changed your mind just when you saw your dad?
Just saw my dad, and he's like, "How was your day?" And
Yeah, great.
we're good. And
Worst day of my life. Thanks.
really, it was. I really just feel that was God saying, the Spirit just saying,
It
tell-
is.
You gotta
Because
tell.
if you hadn't done that, as we'll talk about, it still had a lot of ramifications for you, but it would have been worse.
So,
Yeah.
but it ultimately just telling him through all of the mumbling. Guy came into the stall while I was in the bathroom.
Yeah.
And then he's like, "All right, get in the car."
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, we're dealing with this.
So,
Yeah. So as you're giving a sketch to the police, did they ever find out who it was?
no, there was never anything that really came from it. Stipulation was the carnival was in town at the same time at the Auburn Mall, and so potentially some worker, or
traveler who
something like that.
was do that, sneak into schools. Yeah. And so the immediate aftermath, as much as you can remember, because it's a while now, what are some of the emotions you went through?
A lot of fear of public restrooms. Going in the bathroom by myself.
Yeah.
A lot of shame, a lot of not wanting people to find out or know about it. I was very thankful for the staff and the teachers. Everyone knew, like they had the consent to let the teachers know what was
Yep.
going on. And so everyone was very understanding. All individually came up and said, "Hey, if you ever just need to get up and go, you have the green light." So that support was encouraging.
Yeah.
Basically the nurse saying, "Hey, if you need to go to the bathroom, there's one in my office. You can come in." Like
Yeah.
having that green light. So a really good support system in that regards, even just from a public school setting, is just everyone being very understanding and wanting to help, but at the same time not feeling like they were trying to fix anything or push anything or say, "Hey, tell us more," or whatever the case
Right.
may be.
They're just like, we're here for you and
They're
we understand.
very, very supporting, but a lot of it started kind of triggering this idea of like, "All right, God, what's going on?" Like, I was really involved with youth group.
So you were, even though young, you would call yourself a believer at that
Yes,
time.
yeah. So fully involved with, as a student leader in the youth ministry,
Mhm.
part of they had like a intricate team, or what's the word? Basically, teen leaders that were
Yeah.
involved with helping. We had a youth program on Sunday nights where we'd turn the church into a youth center, and I was part of the setup and the breakdown
Yep.
and that part of things, and part of the worship team at that point too, playing drums on it, and so very involved. And my parents' family, a part of the church, a Christian home, loving Christian home, but this idea of like, all right, what did I do? Why is this happening to me? Like, why is the best thing? So, probably the best word for it. So yeah, there was.
What were you, how were you trying to cope? Were you trying to, would you say you after, we're now a few months after or whatever, right? Like you're on with life, there's good support at the school. Were you trying to just move on and forget it happened, or were you in counseling? What kinds of things were you doing to get help?
Yeah, so there were a good chunk of men at the church that we were going to, that I knew for a long time, looked up to, and really respected, that came to me and actually told me about their experience, that it had happened to them when they were younger. And so there was some comfort in that, knowing that I wasn't alone. So the shame aspect of things kind of melted away. It was always kind of lingering, but it was just it did kind of help mitigate that. As far as the counseling side of things, my family never pushed it. I know they were always saying, "Hey, if we need to do something,
Yeah.
we can," but it's your call. So I feel, as an adult now, maybe pushing a little bit harder.
Yeah.
But at the time, there was never I felt that I could always talk to my family, my mom and dad about it, but there was never a push for
Yeah.
for that.
Well, like you can imagine now having your own kids, it's like being a parent sometimes it's impossible,
Yeah, it's-
especially in situations like that.
Yeah.
You know, and credit to them, your dad. It seems like common sense that they jumped on it and helped and supported and got you help and probably told those men in the church, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that sounds like, of course, that's what we would do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I've heard too many stories where maybe not intentionally, but the parents made their child feel like it's kind of their fault, even though they didn't intend to. But by not helping and supporting and encouraging, just let's just move on, they almost made the problem worse because then they feel like a betrayal to their parents, and it's almost worse than being abused by a stranger. I mean, it's not, but you know what I mean?
Right.
Like thinking like, okay, there's bad people out there, but gosh, I would have thought I could count on my parents. And the parents is not like sometimes they're just downright bad, but like a lot of times they just don't know what to do.
Right.
And at least your parents really, you know, took really good steps. They probably, yeah. And nowadays counseling is way more prominent anyway. So it's just, you know, we're kind of used to it.
Right.
Most of our kids are in counseling for one reason or another. So, you know, so what kinds of things did you talk about with those men at the church? Just like, was it more than once, or did they just kind of come to you one or two times, check in with you?
Yeah, I'd say about 9 or 10 different guys were telling me about. A lot of it were experiences. It was family members.
Yeah,
It was people that were close to either blood relatives or really close
Like
people
that,
to family.
that's a lot of guys. And I know that happens, but was that almost a little overwhelming when you're hearing that many stories?
There was, yeah, and a lot of it, a lot of it wasn't necessarily on the overwhelming. It was just more of, like you said, the amount of people that it happened to, and finding some comfort in that. But a lot of it wasn't me necessarily talking about my feelings. A lot of them were just saying, "Hey, if you want to talk,
Yeah.
I understand what you're going through."
Yeah.
And so it was, I think at that point, still not wanting to talk about that. I think even through my senior year of high school, I really didn't even talk about it.
Yeah.
There were people, like the circle kind of grew, and as time went on, my mom would ask, like, "Hey, can I tell so-and-so?" Mainly for asking for prayer
Yeah.
about things. And so... yeah, she wasn't like, "I'm going to tell, can I post it?" This was like pre-Facebook. "Can I put it on MySpace?" Or
MySpace, yeah.
yeah, she still has her instructions to her phone. She's not doing MySpace.
Yeah.
But
But
it
just
was-
learned MySpace, and she's like, I'm not moving off of it.
It was that mentality of her wanting. That's how she knew how to support me, and that was getting people to pray for me.
Did you talk about it at all with any friends? Anybody, your peers?
Through high school, I think there were a couple of people I talked to and about it, but it wasn't anything that I
Yeah.
was like, "Hey, I want to tell everybody about this." And even years out of high school, there were people now that were coming up on 20th class reunion. And there were some people that I'm still kind of like, "Hey, you remember that situation?" "Yeah, it was me." And so the one thing that's been nice about that is people genuinely getting sad about that it happened to me, for me, so looking back, maybe being more open about it might have helped, but at the same time, like in this, you don't know how people are going to react in that situation.
You're now dealing with your peers as they're adults now.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean they would have started making fun of you. There might have been someone who would, of course. So some people just cruelly use whatever they got because they're hurt, and hurt people hurt people. But most of them just wouldn't have known what to do with it, you know?
Yeah, and part two, like I remember just comments like kids would make, not necessarily in a mean way, but saying, "Oh well, if I was in that situation, I
Oh,
would have
yeah.
done this,"
Yeah.
and it's like,
No, you wouldn't have.
no, you wouldn't have. But from my, I was like, maybe I should have. There was
Yeah.
that question, like maybe I should have done this, and like I think even as adults, sometimes there's like dreams or things that happen where I'm like, oh, I could have done this escape route, or like I could have jumped out of the stall or like kicked them or something. But
So in those thoughts, what is like what kind of feelings does that bring?
a lot of them, like not necessarily in the past, like it hasn't been, I'd say past 5 years or so that there's not been any, but leading up to that, there's been like smaller dreams of not necessarily being as intense, and there have been times where kind of reliving it,
Yeah.
but it never escalates past the door. Like I'll either see the eyes and then it'll just move on, which I don't know if I'm thankful for, because it still feels very open ended because the guy was never found. Like there's that element of like, why, yeah, like yeah, it's yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's feelings of like it's still left undealt with in a way.
Yeah.
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 Well, you were obviously, as you said, you were very involved with church, and so at least for a 13, 14-year-old kid, you're as believing as you can be at that age, right? And it caused you to be like, what did I do wrong? But talk more about that. At that time that you can remember, what did it do to your faith? Did it not? I'm not saying you lost it, but how did it change things for you?
I always knew God was there. Like I never stopped that aspect. I never was like, well, he's not real, or
Yeah.
there was always that understanding. It was more of just the questioning of like, it was that why. And to kind of tie in with that summer I ended up in the hospital with 105, 106 fevers, and the lymph nodes on my neck were swelling up, and for about a week and a half my mom and dad thought I wasn't going to make it.
Why were your lymph nodes swelling up?
I had gotten bit by a dog on my left leg, and then about a week later, all of a sudden, I ended up.
It was like an infection because of the bite?
It was weird. It was like
You had rabies?
I might have rabies, mad cow's disease, maybe. But it was one
So
of those,
what month was the abuse happened?
so that was January
Okay.
of 2001.
It's like midway through the year, and then you finish the school year, and it's summer. You get bit by a dog.
It was the week and a half before my sophomore year, so the end of August.
How much time went in between the dog bite and going to the hospital? Did it take time for that to manifest? Or
So it was about maybe 4 or 5 days after, and all of a sudden, like the lymph nodes started swelling up, and then I had these fevers of, like I said,
What kind of dog was it? Chihuahua?
yeah, it was baby Chihuahua. It was a balloon duck. It was a balloon animal I found on the side. No, it was a German Shepherd that my friend's family had for protection. Usually the dog has a muzzle.
I wonder why you're a
It's
cat
weird.
person.
That's why I'm a cat person.
German Shepherds scare me, dude.
Yeah.
And that could be great dogs.
Yep.
I don't want any feedback. German you mess with dog people and you really hear from it. So I know that they can be great, but that's part of why they're great. When they're part of your family, they're extremely defensive.
Yeah, and this dog was primarily for protection.
Yeah.
And so he normally has a muzzle on, but it just so happened to be the one day he was on his chain, and we were playing basketball outside, and it had just rained, and I'd gone after a basketball, and I was going towards the dog, and I ended up sliding on the pavement and actually fell over the dog.
So have you had a nightmare about that? Because that sounds like a nightmare.
We're cool. I'm a dog person now.
But it's just like the idea of sliding and you can't stop.
Can't
You're
stop.
falling into
And
a
he
dog.
just latched onto my leg, and so
Dude.
yeah. So this is all in a period of less.
And so
than a year.
you end up getting really, really high fever. That's how you know something's bad.
Something's
and your
wrong.
lymph nodes really
Yeah,
swollen.
we go to the hospital that night.
Did you make the connection, or your parents with the dog?
Not at that
You
point.
just thought something could serious. Well, it was serious, but like, what is this?
Yeah, it ends up being a mono-related thing that only one person in the entire hospital had even heard about. Never mind treating it and things like that. So,
Wow.
yeah, it was so that a week and a half of that, and they ended up switching out my IV, and so I ended up breaking out in a full medical rash as well on top of that. So I'm packed with ice, and they're monitoring. It was.
Well,
I just
you
wanted.
said your parents, there was question of you surviving it.
Yeah, yeah. My mom told me a couple of years, many years later, that she had a conversation. She had many conversations with God, saying, "You told me he was going to be a special kid. He is, and if this is it, that he's your child, but please don't."
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like the idea.
Yeah. So it was a lot more serious. I was just
Yeah, you're
frustrated
going
that
through it. Yeah.
I was missing out on the last week and a half of my summer vacation. That's where my mindset was.
Yeah.
Not realizing like how serious that
Right.
was. So
You'll be lucky to have a new school year, let alone, summer vacation.
yeah.
Yeah. But this piggybacks you going through all of that your freshman year. You almost die. And so it all must have been related when it came to thinking about God, like what's going on here,
Yeah.
especially as a teenager.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was very much like I'm doing everything I should be doing. I am living how I should be living. Why? Like what? all the W's, like why, where, when, like just not understanding.
And did you get an answer?
Not yet.
Still waiting on that.
No, I mean,
Did you feel, like, I know you already said something, like you stopped believing in God, but did you feel a distance because you weren't getting an answer, or was there a closeness to God, or what? How would you describe it?
it like even talking with Kristen about it, it's just not. It was never doubting God, but at the same time, it was never that like real, like having that relationship, like walking the faith.
Yeah.
It was all I knew about it. It just was not.
Mm.
That connection wasn't happening. Even though I had accepted Christ at a young age and was Christian family, just never really having a bad experience. For some reason that heart connection kind of dissipated, like the passion, the desire to dig into the Word and to be doing what I should be doing, kind of fizzled out. And
Why do you think, as you look back? I mean, it's
yeah,
understandable, but why for you do you think that happened?
I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
It was one of those things I can't put my finger on, as much as I've tried to say, okay, and it was never a real like hard, not even like a light switch. It was just I just remember it slowly just fizzling out, and but
Over about how long of a, is this? Is like, obviously you're high school, you're still playing in the band, doing youth group and all that. You didn't stop doing those things.
no, still involved.
Yeah.
I guess called playing church is the best way
Yeah.
to put it. Is I was going through the motion and doing the things that I should be doing, and I still enjoyed. There wasn't anything. I never didn't want to go to church or youth group because I still liked seeing people. I liked, for whatever reason, when it came to the worship, the music side of things, I could still feel like I was engaged in that aspect, but the rest of life was not. It was like I said, trying to put into words there was no way to really define it. It was just that's how it was.
Yeah.
It was weird, but so
Yeah. But I mean, I think, you're 14, 15, and it's less. I could see where like nobody else would have probably picked up on it as much because you're a teenager and hey, you're going to church, you're going to youth group, playing the band. I mean, that's more than most, right? It's not like if it was like your age right now, or like I have a wife and kids, and now I'm like, you yourself probably would know yourself better to be like, this isn't right. There's something going on. But when you're a teenager and you're just kind of like, just not really putting a lot of thought into it. Or am I wrong? Did it bother you?
I don't think it wasn't until I think after I graduated high school, where there was actually a visitor to the church who just so happened, I don't know if they were visiting a friend, it was their first time in church.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I had actually started playing guitar. That's actually one of the good things that came out of the hospital situation, the lymph node situation, was my parents actually had picked up a guitar. My neighbor was throwing it out. They saw it in the trash, and so they asked him if they could have it. Picked up the guitar and put brand new strings on it and gave me a book of the top 10 contemporary Christian hits at that point. I think I Could Sing Your Love Forever by Sonic Flood was in there.
Forever and forever and forever.
Love Song by Third Day. And so I actually, the one redeeming factor was actually learned how to play guitar. And I was playing guitar and functioning, and even with the high fevers and things like that. So,
But you said the stranger came to church.
yeah, so the stranger came to church, and so I'm going to tie it in, I swear. So I actually had learned to play guitar and actually got involved with actually leading the music on Sunday, leading the worship through song. And so I was going through the motions of playing, even though the rest of my life was kind of not together. But she came up, she said, I can just see your passion and your love for God and when you play. And it hit me at that point. I really felt it was God saying, what are you doing? Like,
It was an angel. She was like, I see your passion.
it was
You'll have someday.
It was very, 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 very passive. No, but it was really, at that moment, realized, okay, you're not fooling anybody. Like, and so that was kind of like the turning point of realizing something had dissipated, something had gone. That wasn't.
Well, yeah, that's a few years, right? Yeah. Yeah. In what ways do you think, especially in those years, high school, young adult age, what did the abuse that you suffered, how did it impact you, do you think?
I think a lot was just on the relationship side of any dating relationship. Part of that as well was kind of going off into the pornography side of things. Ended up becoming kind of a refuge. I found, I guess, say comfort. It was an escape from, it would just so happen there was one time a buddy ended up sharing something with me, and something kind of clicked in that regards. And then
This was in high school?
This is in high school. This was probably about my sophomore year, so the year following all this happening, and finding that kind of escape from things. And so it just became a deep dive. And then even through senior year of high school and up until that point with that stranger, it was just another part of my life at that point. And so that it had an effect. I don't know if that whole situation jump-started that, but it definitely was part of it, and part of the trigger, I guess is the best way to put it.
When you kind of said it affected like dating relationships, what do you mean?
Feeling, not necessarily being abusive, but feeling the need to be in control of things. And a lot of it too was not probably setting boundaries the way that I should have at the point. Now, granted, being a teenager, that's kind of not like a marriage relationship, but still at the same time being confident enough to set boundaries in that regards. Yeah.
And how did it manifest needing to be in control?
So a lot of it was very, by nature, I'm a physical person, like cuddly, like my love language is, physical touch. Like I like to cuddle my kids. And so it became, I guess, most of the relationships became very physical.
Yeah.
And in points of being taking things too far than where they should have been. And yeah, so
So what happened after the stranger comes? Did you see a kind of a turnaround right away, or was that just sort of like a signpost and it took a little bit more for you to turn around?
yeah, it probably was, I'd say, a few months after, like the May. I remember it being with windows being open, so it was springtime-ish or things like that. So I'd say a few months after that is when that first exposure came in, and then from there, just kind of snowballing and just the frequency. I was not the best of. My parents were happy I graduated, I'll put it that way. So when it came to academics, struggled in that regard. So the stress side of things, needing not only parents but teachers being on you about homework and grades and all that fun stuff. So the added stress, all the big problems as a teenager that you face.
Yeah.
Being able to.
It was the pornography was coping.
It ended up turning into a coping thing, and realizing the small escape that it provided and
Yeah.
to get out. So,
Yeah.
but because of that too, that also contributed to the relationship and the sexual side of things,
Yeah.
and perverting things from where they should
Of course.
be.
Yeah. Sounds like you sort of segmented your life up, right? Like, there's church and playing music and all that, and then there's the school side, and then there's and so you don't touch these things, right?
Right.
And it sounds like the Lord was like, nope,
Right.
not going to let you do that, right? So the woman visits the church, says that to you. Did that change? What did God do in that message?
Yeah. So I remember her being, it being one of those things where it was probably about a week and a half, 2 weeks of sleepless nights of just wrestling with that. I'd wake up and not being able to fall back asleep, and just that phrase, like, you can see your love for God, you can see your love for God, and it's just like, who are you fooling? It really could audibly hear God saying, "You're not fooling anybody. You're not fooling anybody."
Anybody that matters.
Yeah, that's right. And
Do you think your parents could see there was differences in you?
I think as I've talked about that part of struggles, and I'm sure my dad ends up finding things on computers and things
Yeah.
like that, and web browser history, having those conversations. They mentioned that there was a shift. There was a weight, I guess is the best way to put it, of me just not being the happy, chipper person that I normally was. And so, yeah, there was definitely a physical, an emotional change. There was this baggage and this weight that was kind of weighing down on me while all this was going on. So.
Yeah. Well, for anyone who thinks pornography is something you can just do and have it not affect you, that's fantasy land. It's not meant, it's not helpful. It's almost like a drug, coping, going to when you're stressed. And
I can stop anytime.
Yep.
I can stop.
yeah.
Which you can't. And I think in that regards too, they're coming back to feeling that shame that I once felt from that situation, wanting to talk to people about it. You mention it now, it's almost more taboo than a lot of subjects that are out there. Like, you can talk about other addictions, and you can talk
Yeah.
about stuff that you're struggling with, but as soon as it comes to that, is this shame of like, nope, we don't want to don't talk about that.
I also wonder, some of that is because so many people are engaging in it. Statistically speaking, like let's say because it can be, if let's just take like the church for instance, like all the people in the church, like how many are struggling with a drug addiction, maybe they're past one, but are actually physically or an alcohol addiction. You're going to have those. There's no doubt.
Right.
But in comparison to how many are probably at least to some degree viewing pornography, so where are you going to get the help? Someone's going to be like, if you say that's a problem, now I got to deal with myself. And it is the sex thing. It's also it's changing, but it's become as far as this goes. But it's always been very dominated male problem for obvious reasons, and so it's often females that we go to because they're better at nurturing and helping. Guys are like, how do I fix this? And they don't know how to fix them. So you go to a woman for that, and they're like, well, that's just wrong. Stop doing that, right? And again, it's unfortunately as we've progressed or degressed is a better way in society, more and more women are becoming addicted to pornography. It's still more obviously male, but I think there's a lot of things to add to that. Boil it down, you're right. It's like, how do I get help? Who do I talk to about this?
Right. Especially as like thinking of guys that, as teenagers, I think it's more commonplace where it's just like something that
Yeah.
friends are doing. I know it's probably open more now than it was back in. It was still kind of hush hush, but it was still more very openly talked about.
Yeah. You were in the computer age. Now we got the phones.
Yeah.
And it's crazy.
Yeah. But never mind adults that have families and kids, and
Oh, yeah.
and I think there's a need for things to be, just like with anything, it needs to be addressed, and to know that it's to be able to for it to be able to be done without feeling judged. And I think that's where the biggest fear is. Well, if so and so is going to find out, well, people are going to know about that. Well, yeah, that's the important part. First step to recovery is admitting you have a problem,
Yeah.
and being able to say, I need to fix this,
Yeah.
and know that there are people that want to help and want to see you victorious in that regards. And
So as you're tossing and turning for that week and a half, wrestling, really pulling a Jacob in a way,
Yep.
what do you remember God doing in that? Besides obviously saying you're not fooling anybody, but
Right.
like that process, what did God do?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was just that feeling of, no, I'm okay. I don't have a problem. I'm okay.
Right, during the daylight hours too, right?
Yeah,
At
it
night
was.
where it's
The talking or the wrestling went on during and then the
Yeah.
rest of the day was just like
I'm fine.
something I gotta do. Something needs to be done. And I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm absolutely good with this. We can make it through, and we're gonna be fine. And then we just so happened to start doing kind of a worship evening where it was kind of an open format, and my mom and dad had asked me, like, hey, do you want to come and play guitar and lead some songs? And it wasn't anything necessarily planned. I wouldn't have a band, or there wouldn't be a PowerPoint or overhead projector or whatever you want to use for your lyric source.
Yeah.
But you would just play, and people would share scripture and just openly pray. And I said, sure. Because I'm bad with making excuses, and especially with my parents, I said, sure. And so we ended up having it, and I remember it was literally the second song in, I felt, the song Voice of Truth by Casting Crowns popped into my head. And in my mind, I'm like, this is not a worship. It's worshipful, but it's not a worship song like that you would sing during a worship. And I struggled the whole night. And I ended up probably about an hour's worth that this was going on and so finally the last song of the night, I said, okay, I'm going to play it. Like me saying, I'm like, all right, God, I'm going to play this. And I ended up playing the song. And this woman came up to me, another random woman coming up to me asking why I played that song. And I said, well, in all honesty, I have no clue why I had the song. It's something that popped into my head, and just really felt that I should play it. And I said, why is that? And she didn't go to the church. She randomly was driving by that night, and God told her to go into the church because she needed to be there. She walked in at the second song, and about the point when I started feeling the song Voice of Truth. And she explained to me the struggles that she had been going through. There was some medical issues and some marital issues, and that song was her anthem. And she walked in and just said, God, I need to hear Voice of Truth. I need to hear Voice of Truth. And so it was God's prompting to say, hey, you need to play this song. And it was kind of that light bulb moment of like, okay, there's something different. There's something that needs to be done there. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of like the shift of that repentance moment, I guess you can call it.
But it's interesting with just the subject of the song, truth.
Yeah. And so that was, and I think that kind of ties into how, with music, on the music standpoint of things, I was always very comfortable there. And I did feel that connection, whatever, maybe it might have been a heart, but there was just that feeling of like, this is what you need to, this is what I created you to do.
Yeah.
But it was in that moment that I was just like, couldn't have been any clearer at that point of like God saying, hey,
yeah, it's a little tough to ignore.
You're not fooling anybody. So, yeah, it was.
How many more angels I gotta send to the church? Crying out loud.
It was interesting. But
so did that begin a shift? And did you get help?
It was finding accountability at that point. Talking to, there were some of the guys that had come to me before about their experiences, which they also ended up going later on in life, the pornography, because when they were younger, it wasn't as prevalent, but it was something that they also ended up struggling with. So it seemed like this common tie of like, it kind of, because of whether it be abuse or some sort of situation, kind of finds that association. And so, but yeah, finding that accountability, and luckily it wasn't a long road. And of course, there were relapses along the road after that. But it was in probably, I'd say, half a year to a year's worth of time of just being intentional about confiding in people and asking for help and looking for that support.
Did you find yourself overall growing closer to God during that time?
Yeah, that was...
'Cause that was obviously a big barrier.
Yeah, it was one of those, that weight kind of dropped off that I was feeling, the burden, and a lot of it is holding that stuff inside, but realizing that my not necessarily, it wasn't necessarily the need, it was the fact that God was still using me, even when I was doing things my own way, when I was far from where I should have been. The fact that he still decided to use me and allowed me to be a part of worship settings, and in that settings, and even people saying, "Hey, you can see how God is, how much you love God," and it's just like, I'm not sure how they could have, but it's, he was still using me, and so it was definitely that shift, and you could feel the weight of things kind of melting away.
Yeah. You ever feel like, when you think like God already knows you, it's your finished product? Isn't that weird to think about? Yeah. So it's like, you're going through that, and obviously it grieves God, and he takes action when we're his, but he also knows who we, it's not like, because we look at it, you have kids, I have kids, mine a little older, but the same idea. It's like, you see where they could go, but you're just hoping, and you're doing your best and trying to correct because you want them to, but imagine if you already know, like, know you're already in the future, and you know it probably make you a little bit more patient with them because you're like, you're gonna get there.
It is, and I've thought about that many times, especially being a dad now.
Yeah.
Is like how you could see your kids, like, as much as you want to protect them, there are things that they still need to learn to do.
Yeah.
Like, you can only tell your son so many times, hey, don't jump off the side of the couch. Don't, before he ends up like falling down and hurting himself. You can guide him and you can try to direct
Boys,
him.
man. Boys.
But boys are boys.
Although it's your daughter who ended up.
Yeah, Abby, we're coming up on the year for that. So, but it's that element. It's like, if my love for my kids is this much. Like, how much more does God love me?
Yeah.
And want me to not jump off of the couch or not break my arm, you know?
Yeah, so it's like when he's looking at if someone's involved in something like pornography or really anything, but that's a big one these days. And when we're talking about, I think they sometimes think like, so God is just like, and he's obviously angry about that. It's sin. He hates sin, but it's not. It's that he knows what. Like, you're a kid jumping off the couch. This is fun. It's great, and you're like, I know, and I want you to have fun. I love you, but it ain't gonna go well. God knows what it's doing to you, little by little, by little by little. How it's going to hinder things in the future. How it's going to hurt you. Yeah. And so that's why he wants it. And I think people need to, see it that way more. Like, God loves me enough to be a good dad and to say, that's killing you, man. You're lying to yourself, or you're just lacking information that I have, and I'm going to do what it takes to get you to stop. Yeah. So as you progress, like as you kind of look, now 3 kids, married to Kristen, looking back and even looking at the present, how do you think that abuse, what are some things it's done to you? Do you think? How's it impacted you?
Yeah, I think at least for, I say, the first 10 years after it happened, I think up until I started really kind of opening up more about it. So, little as we went through high school, but the first couple of years out of high school, being a little bit more brave to talk about it.
Yep.
I think I still don't know why it happened. I've always approached it, maybe somebody needs to hear about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one reason approaching you when you started doing these series, saying like, hey, are you going to
talk about this?
Do this at all?
Yeah.
And even as I told you coming up here, like all this week leading up to it, felt I shouldn't talk about this, which made me feel even more so that I need to talk about this.
That's the enemy.
It's something that needs to get out there.
Look at how many guys in a church, right? It's a place where you're like, probably less. Right. And not that they did anything wrong, but it's just like, you hope maybe Christian families and blah, 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 whatever. How many guys, now if you were a girl and it was women, it would be even more, statistically speaking.
Right.
And so, and now it's just gotten worse as far as the numbers. So the idea of we shouldn't talk about it is definitely from the enemy. Right. Because how are people going to know they can get help if they don't know that help is there and that it's okay to talk about it?
Yeah. But definitely feeling that it's as cliche it is, like everything happening for a reason. And I know because of my circumstances and the things that I've dealt with and the relationships I have been in have made me that more appreciative of what I have with Kristen and what we have as a couple. But even elements of the fact that how we know each other because of Tim Freitas, someone that I met 2001 randomly, who invited me to a young adults group after I graduated high school.
Yeah.
And
you brought your guitar, man.
And
I don't know if
and-
you sang "Voice of Truth," but it's okay.
Yeah, no, it wasn't in there yet. But even that, as simple
Yeah.
as that, of like that we're here
Yeah.
because of someone I met, 23 years ago.
So God's got things planned, you know.
It's
It's a
amazing.
broken, sinful world, and obviously God's not. He ordains those, as I just preached yesterday, the wildernesses that we go into, but He doesn't cause. He's not a sinner. He doesn't cause this horrible things to happen to you, but He will use them, and that's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard. How did it impact you? Did it impact and still like friendships or your relationship with Kristen, or has it had a residue effect for you that you can tell the abuse?
As far as the marriage side of things, no. Like
Yeah.
it was, I think, far enough out of that where it and since that point, since it had happened, so yeah, Reader's Digest version, no, on the marriage there hasn't been anything. There were relationships that I think were worn a little bit more, certain dating relationships where things just did not pan out the way that they should have been, and there were burned bridges and long-term friendships that were ruined because of that. And so, but overall, like where I am now, really holding firm to the idea that God is going to use it. I am not the same person who I was, even in the years following that. Even in the past 5 years, I'm a different person than who I was, and so the shame and the fear and the embarrassment of what happened is no longer there. And so having more of a trust, knowing that He's going to use it, and that even though they never found the guy, God's going to deal with him.
Right.
He doesn't have to answer. He doesn't have to answer to me. He's going to have to answer to God in the long run. And I think that's where there's comfort. There's some resolution, some resolve, and all of that. Just because it's that mindset of it's not. I don't have to worry about that, and it has no. Yeah, I think that's. Yeah, we'll go with that.
Have you ever thought about, and this is kind of a weird scenario to think about, but if just randomly one day that guy saw you and came up to you and said, "I'm sorry," what would you do?
Yeah, it's.
I mean, I'd understand if you knock his head off.
Yeah. So I know I have faced a lot of the relationships that I tarnished, and there have been other situations that when they had happened had kind of gone under the radar, but 20-something years later they come up because it was brought up in whether it be a counseling session or things like that, and lifelong friendships were burned, bridges were burned at that point. And because of what I went through, wanting to make amends, there's always been that idea. I know I need to forgive this guy, and I feel at this point I have forgiven him. Like, not just saying it in my head, but out loud saying, God, I choose to forgive this guy because he hurt me. But I take him off of my hook and I place him on yours to deal with.
Right.
And so with these relationships, some people have been open to it, which has been wonderful, and it's cordial and everything is good. There are other people that have not been as cordial and said, well, yeah, you're sorry, but what about X, Y, and Z, and bringing up other things. And so knowing how that makes me feel when I'm trying to do, not only because I genuinely do care about these people, but because I know God's calling me to make amends. I'm supposed to make things right.
Reconcile. Yeah.
And having that response of like, I think it's very attuned to what I think Satan does a lot of the time. It's like, yeah, you're asking forgiveness for this, but what about this? And then, he accuses you of, you've done this and this, but
Yeah.
it's because we're called to make things right. And it would be like the servant who gets forgiven his burden,
Yeah.
and then throws a guy in jail because of
Lunch money?
For lunch money, pretty much. And so who am I, if I want that forgiveness, who am I to withhold that from someone? How I would be feeling in that moment?
Yeah. If you actually, it's
There's
one
the
thing
emotions
to forgive from
and the
distance.
feel.
Yeah.
But the ultimate, I would want to forgive this guy because that's what he deserves, and for him to be able to receive that.
Maybe it would be easier if he came up to you and asked for forgiveness. Because right now you have to forgive him, knowing more than likely there isn't a need. We don't know, but more than likely he's not looking for that, and that's harder. It's always hard, but I think it's harder to forgive someone when they don't really care if you forgive them or not.
Right.
Yeah. So what would you say to someone who might watch this and has been hurt in some way, in a way you did? Maybe it's obviously not the exact same circumstance, but it was a family member or something, and they don't really know what to do. What would you tell them?
I think you're not alone. That as much as you want to hide it and bag it up, it's still okay to process and to feel. People may tell you that you need to feel a certain way, or that you should process through it quickly, or
Yeah.
just, we might get the typical Sunday school answer, well, God's going to use it for his glory. And
Yeah.
there's still feeling, and there's still emotion, and it's a part of you that you feel violated. But you're not alone. That the only way that you can, unless God miraculously just like heals you of it, and it can happen. He can do that. You can just feel his presence with you and just move on and call it a day. But majority of the time, you need support. You need people. You need community. As much as you feel that you should be isolating, you need to be, even more so, be with people, and asking for help, looking for guidance, or even just someone to talk to. I think is the biggest thing. Just talking about it is one of the biggest things that you can do, and finding that it's the starting point of is talking to someone about it.
Yeah. So you're not holding it all in. What about if somebody is a parent or a brother or a sister or a friend of someone who they find out? What would you tell them to do? How do you help that person?
It's it's such a fine line. I think the biggest thing is first off praying about it, and I think doing kind of what my mom did, was saying, hey, can I tell so and so to pray about it? And that's I think the first start, and just really asking God to give you the words to say, because as much as you think ultimately it's God's guidance that's gonna give you the words that you need to say. He can make it sound the way it needs to sound, as long as you're being obedient and doing things in, I think, in love is the biggest thing. Is if you're trying to go into a situation hoping to fix it and
Yeah.
be the fixer, it might work, but it can be more harmful than helpful. And
Yeah, you're not a good God. You can't.
no,
You can't do what only God can do. But it's human nature,
yeah,
especially guys. We want to fix.
yeah. But I think finding ways to encourage them to talk to somebody, whether it
Yeah.
be counseling or even if it's just to find a support system, whether it be
Yeah.
one person or a group of people. But finding that support, being able to face things in numbers is a good thing.
I think, as we were talking about earlier, people need to realize how important our reaction, and it's not just a situation like abuse, but really any traumatic thing that someone you're close to goes through, that how you react to them is going to be huge. And it doesn't, you're not going to be able to fix it, and you're not going to be able to have the magic right words, and that's totally okay. People they really aren't looking for you to do that. But if you poo-poo it, or let's just move on, like as we said, I had Paula on, who an older woman who had been abused a couple different times, that I talked with her a different episode, and she kind of, because her family kind of just moved on, and I think it really impacted her choice of relationships, and she does too. And so it's like, as a loved one, like what your parents, they could have, you probably should have encouraged a little bit more counseling, but the way they were there for you, had men come talk to you, pray for you, pray about it. You never felt like you were alone in it, and that's made such a huge difference. And that's what we can do to people, for people. It's just, we're here, we care about you, this isn't your fault, right? The classic, remember Good Will Hunting, that movie where like the big Matt Damon is like, it's not your fault, over and over again, because he had been abused, and he had been putting that hard shell on. He's like, it's not, because that's what people think. You probably thought that a little bit, like, I could have done something, I could have. And it's like, well, you shouldn't have had to do something.
Right. You
shouldn't have been put in that position. And, but it's the human way of thinking about things sometimes, So what do you think God will do with this moving forward?
Whatever he wants. I mean,
well, that's for sure.
Yeah, but I really, like I said, with as soon as I started seeing like some of the stories, like with Rusty and like Mark, and just like these topics, it's like really felt like, all right, this needs to, my story needs to be heard.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that it can minister to people, if not help someone in the healing process, at least begin the healing process, and really allow them to start moving in the right direction. That God would just use it to help people.
Yeah, it will, no doubt. I mean, like you took some of those episodes, applied it to your situation, even if it's not somebody who went through an abusive situation, just in a situation where they don't feel God, they don't understand why something happened, grief, divorce, loss, all these different things, sickness, to hear your story and to know, like, God is there, and it might be a bit of a dark night right now, but don't stay that course with him, because he's got you, in your story like that. It's so cool how he used just two random ladies.
Yeah, and I think so often it feels more cliche to say, well, God's there. He's not going to leave you or forsake you, and it can feel like the Sunday school answer. And it's a lot of times to say, well, I can I can compare myself. Well, Job had everything taken away from him, and he still was glorifying God. It's like,
Well, he also had many chapters of yelling at God too.
there's
So.
all that too. But I think we always try to compare. Well, either compare it to other situations or how other people deal with situation, and we forget that we're all different, and we all have had different experiences of life and our relationship with God. We're going to, because of our experiences, we're going to view things differently, and it's so easy to say one thing, but it's also difficult to apply it with saying out loud, God's in control. Saying it and believing it are two different things.
And I think that's maybe the primary reason why I'm doing this podcast is because it does sound cliche until it doesn't. And so it's not me preaching a sermon and I only have so much time and I can maybe give an example and say God is with you in this, and that's totally true. We don't need to hear that. But they have an opportunity to hear your story, what you walked through, that no one would ever want to walk through. And you're sitting here saying, God was with me through that. Like, that doesn't sound cliche at all, because it's not. It's your real story. So that's what's so profound about it, is people can see that and say, okay, yeah, the pastor preached a sermon, God is with you, but he doesn't know my story. But I'm listening to the Tim story, and I'm like, okay, yeah. It's one thing to look at Job, like, whenever that was, and it sounds so, like, distant from us, but to hear someone I can see, and he's up in church playing, and I'll be interesting to see how many people come up to you and be like, wow, it really looks like you love God. After this episode.
Can you guys play Voice of Truth on tonight? That'd be great. It'd be a good time.
Yeah, but that's why we're doing this. And so I really appreciate you coming on, and I hope, and I know that if anyone who hears this who's locally, you're welcome for them to reach out to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're not going to have all the answers, but you'll at least point them in the right direction and pray for them.
Yeah.
And help them,
Yeah, I feel very much. I'm a good listener. I don't have all the answers. I'm not gonna pretend to know the answers. But just that I will listen, and I think that's the first step, is being able to just talk about it. But yeah, really, really hoping in that aspect of things, as well as even, like I said, I know how hard the pornography struggle is.
Yeah, that too.
I would encourage anyone who's dealing with that I'm happy to talk, or even if talking to you if you want to give them my number and that type of thing. Just that I want to help. I know the burden and the struggle that comes along with it, and the shame and all of the feels that come along with it.
There won't be a lot of judgment coming from you. That'd be pretty hypocritical, right?
It would be awful. But wanting to, I just want to see that those chains broken, and being able to encourage, if not help you fix it, but just to encourage you in the journey and walk along through it.
Yeah, that's like you said earlier, that's the lie of the enemy, that no one wants to hear my story. And what we're trying to say is, a lot of people actually do, and will. You don't want to just go blabbing to anybody. You want to try to find someone you think you can trust.
Right.
But to trust the Lord will lead you to that, and you got to be known. You have to, otherwise, you got to risk that a little bit, and it could mean getting hurt, because humans are humans. But overall, within the context of the church, most people are going to be like, I want to help you, right? Well, man, I appreciate talking about something so hard, so difficult, and I'm really glad how it worked out and is working out. Just pray that God really uses it.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, man.
Thanks.
Thanks. And cut.
And scene.